Welcome to Madison City Channel's Know Your Candidates interviews, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Dane County. I'm your interviewer, Sally Gleason, and I would like to introduce Tag Evers, running for Alder from District 13. As we begin, please tell our viewers a bit about how your educational, vocational, and civic experience has prepared you for the position and why you decided to run for Alder.
Well, thank you, Sally, and thank you to the League of Women's Voters and to everybody watching right now. If you don't mind, I'd rather just talk about my experience being on City Council since I'm running for re-election.
Sure.
Upon being elected 2 years ago, I focused my attention on the number one issue in the district, and that was preventing a gap in grocery services in South Madison. I'm pleased to say we've come a long way, and we're now on pace to break ground in the spring for a new full-service grocery store and 150 units of affordable housing. I've also sought to elevate the needs and concerns of District 13's most vulnerable residents, and that is, those are the folks who live at Bayview and at the CDA apartments in the Triangle. And during my first term, I sponsored budget amendments that increased the Affordable Housing Fund by $1 million annually. And I worked with colleagues to fund eviction prevention programs and assistance for first-time home buyers. I serve on the Sustainable Madison Committee, where we are rewriting the city's sustainability plan, and I am working with the mayor's office on a major initiative to reduce carbon emissions in our city's building sector. I oppose the F-35s, the only alder west of the Isthmus to do so, and I started the District 13 Neighborhood Alliance to increase communication and cooperation among our neighborhood associations. Racial equity, climate justice, and affordable housing were the reasons I ran 2 years ago, and they remain my top priorities today. I'm running for re-election on April 6th to continue the work I've started.
There will be an advisory referendum on the ballot in April about a number of modifications to the Common Council, including changing the number of members, making it full-time, and changing the term of office. Which of the ideas being advanced do you embrace? Why or why not?
Well, thank you for that question. I agree that the current compensation for alder service is not enough. It generally requires that alders get have a day job, and because it's simply you can't afford to live on what aldermanic pay is, but that ends up being a barrier for low-income folks in our community. And part-time alders also means a weak legislative branch, particularly in comparison to the mayor's office, the executive branch. She's full-time, she has full-time deputy mayors with a support staff, and traditionally mayors in the city of Madison tend to regard city council as an obstacle to legislative progress instead of a partner. But I don't support cutting council in half. I think that will reduce constituent contacts and the opportunity for real representation. And I question that the recommended amount, $70,000, is really the right way to go, because $70,000, in fact, is more than state senators make. And without public financing of local elections, I'm concerned that increasing automatic pay fivefold can result in unintended consequences. I will say that it's encouraging that we have more Black and Latinx candidates running for office this year than ever before. So I remain ambivalent about some of the recommendations. I look forward to what the advisory referendum tells us.
Homelessness, evictions, and lack of affordable housing are vexing problems for Madison that seem to have been exacerbated in the time of COVID-19. What ideas would you advance or support to help solve these problems?
Well, yes, we have an affordable housing crisis in our city. If we assume that housing should account for no more than 30% of household income, then the average Black household cannot afford the average cost of renting an apartment in any census tract across our city. And this is a huge, huge problem. So we need more housing that is guaranteed to be affordable. for those with low incomes. In fact, we need more housing altogether at all income levels to keep housing costs in check. And we simply have more people who want to live in Madison than we have places to put them. And that's why I support the recently announced proposed zoning changes to increase multifamily housing and achieve greater densities in our city. But we're not going to resolve this crisis through the market alone. And that's why I support an expanded land banking strategy where we would take parcels out of the speculative real estate market and make investments that can do the kinds of things that we need, like permanent affordable housing, and to interrupt gentrification and displacement, which is a particular concern in South Madison, with the town of Madison joining us in a few short years.
With the selection of a new police chief and the creation of a community oversight board, there is a lot of attention focused on policing and criminal justice, both from the perspective of racial equity in law enforcement and the concern of many citizens that, in fact, crime, especially car thefts and home burglaries, is increasing and that the police response is inadequate. How would you deal with these concerns?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. When we talk about policing, I think we should bring up the controversial term defund the police. And when we do so, let's address the reality that over the last 40 years in this country, we have defunded public education, we've defunded mental health services, and we've increasingly relied upon the police to stand in the gap, to be the backstop. And that is an issue in and of itself. So what we need to be asking, what is it that the police are doing that we no longer want them to do? And then allocate resources to those agencies and entities that are best suited for these tasks. So instead of getting stuck on the term defund the police, it's best that we start talking more about refunding our communities. And we did a couple of things on council this past year addressing that. We did set up the Civilian Oversight Board, which is a major step forward in increasing accountability and transparency and hopefully rebuilding trust between the police and our communities. And with a new police chief, we have an opportunity to move things forward. I'm very much in support of that. I also am very much in support of increasing funding for the Focus Interruption Coalition so that they can do more proactive work in our community and not just reactive work after shots are fired.
Madison businesses of all kinds have been severely stressed during the past year. What, if anything, would you propose to support business revitalization?
Well, it is true, but not all businesses have been impacted the same. The impacts have actually been disparate, and they fall disproportionately on certain industries like the restaurant industry, the entertainment industry, which I happen to know a great deal about, the tourism industry. We have expanded the Street Re program. It's a good program. We started it and we are expanding it. I support the notion that we should remove buses from State Street and make State Street a true pedestrian mall. If you've been to Boulder, Colorado and seen Pearl Street, you get an idea of what I'm talking about. But the impacts of the pandemic have also fallen disproportionately on communities of color, which is why I supported the Small Business Equity and Recovery Fund, $750,000 in this budget cycle and $6.5 million over the next 5 years to address businesses, Black and Latinx-owned businesses, to help them through this pandemic, to come out from it with a platform to build wealth and equity, financial equity moving forward.
What measures should Madison take to increase our city's environmental sustainability?
Well, that's a good question, Sally. I appreciate it. I happen to sit on the Sustainable Madison Committee, where we are rewriting the city's sustainability plan. And I'm working with a group of fellow alders and Plan Commission members. We're focused on sustainability in the framework of the built environment. And the built environment, which is 30%, well, let's just say that 48% of our energy use and carbon emissions come from the built environment citywide, 30% from the commercial sector and 18% from the residential sector. So I see a real opportunity here. Alder Abbas and I have been invited to work with the mayor's office to develop a major initiative to address the building sector. It's an important area of progress. As I mentioned earlier, I opposed the F-35s, and I stand with the DNR and their demands that the Defense Department clean up the PFAS in the soils over at Truax, the PFAS contamination that's leaking into our lakes and our drinking water. I also support electrification of city-owned fleet. We're moving aggressively in that regard, and electrification seems to be a part of the Biden administration's new climate plan. But we have to go further than that. We have to reduce vehicle miles traveled and get more cars off the road. I believe that we have the resources as a city to be a climate leader, and it's my intention to keep pushing us to the top.
You have served on committees, and I'm wondering, what are your plans for serving on committees if you are reelected?
Well, I'm on several committees. I'm on the Bayview Foundation board. I'm on the Community Development Authority board. I serve on the Board of Public Works. I serve on the Education Committee, which did not meet that often during COVID, but a very important committee. And we were able to just start meeting recently. And we committed ourselves to address the issue of digital access in low-income communities because of the impact that COVID has had in terms of virtual learning in these low-income communities. And I'm focused particularly on the triangle and kind of using the triangle as a pilot project. How can we get around this? Digital access as a utility should be as commonplace as drinking water, as electricity and heat. So I'm interested in that. But there's going to be a vacancy on Plan Commission, and I plan on asking Mayor Satya if I could be appointed to the Plan Commission if I'm elected in the next term.
What would you like to say to the viewing audience as we complete this interview?
Well, thank you, Sally, and thank you for everybody, anybody who tuned in to watch. I appreciate the opportunity to share my vision and why I'm seeking re-election. I ran for office 2 years ago, believing that skills that I had acquired as a concert promoter, as an event organizer and a community activist could make a difference as we face these big problems in our city. We've gotten a lot done, but there's a lot more work to do. This past year, despite the economic slowdown caused by the pandemic, it was the hottest year on record. And the unrest that erupted after the murder of George Floyd, that's what happens when too much gets ignored for too long. And the housing crisis, as you mentioned, as we discussed, has been deepened and worsened by the pandemic, with so many of our residents facing the possibility of eviction and in dire need of emergency assistance. I'm running for re-election to continue the work I've started. And my values, my commitment have not changed. Same reasons why I ran then are my priorities today. Racial equity, climate justice, affordable housing. And I'm asking for your vote on April 6th. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Tag Evers for speaking with us and the viewing audience for taking the time to know your candidates. As with every election, please vote. On behalf of Madison City Channel and the League of Women Voters of Dane County, I thank you for joining us.